You're tuned in to Getting to the Root of It, focusing on healing and letting go of the wounds of addiction and other unresolved traumas of the past. Your breakthrough begins with you. Are you ready to change your life? Stay tuned as your host, expert therapist, personal development coach, and spiritual cheerleader, Natashah Khan, inspires you to live the life you were destined to live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Getting to the Root of It with your host, Natashah Khan. It's so good to have everyone here today tuning in. This is a special episode that is really focused around families who are impacted by addiction. Many of you know, as a family therapist, I work with a lot of families who struggle when their loved ones are struggling with the disease of addiction. And so today I have a very beautiful, special soul and guest, and also a really dear friend of mine, Miss Alaina Phelps, that is joining me today. Alaina is a family therapist from Robert Alexander Center in Mount Washington, Kentucky, and she too also works alongside families who have been impacted by addiction. Recently, Alaina and I we host a online support group for families, and we got into a conversation about families wanting to help and provide ongoing support to their loved ones when they're, going through the treatment process. So I felt it very important today for those that are listening to learn a little bit more about, the difference between doing and enabling versus helping and supporting. So because Alaina is an expert in this field, I asked Alaina to come on today to be able to talk a little bit more about this and give us any more education or information that she believes that families need to have in order to heal from their own struggles, while at the same time still being able to be hopeful and support their loved ones in this journey. So Alaina, welcome to our podcast. If you want to take a minute and just introduce us, give us a little bit of a background of, where you're from and, what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm definitely excited to be here. I will say, though, introducing me as an expert, that's a lot of high expectations, so I'll try to live up to it. But my name is Lainey. I am a family therapist at the Robert Alexander Center, like Natashah had said. I have worked off and on in addiction recovery for, I guess, close to about 6 to 8 years now. I was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, but I currently reside right outside of Bardstown, Kentucky. I haven't really been doing the family part for as long as just working in addiction recovery. But what kind of landed me in this role is just some personal experience of being the family member of loved ones who struggle with addiction. So when I was offered this opportunity, I was thrilled. I was ecstatic because I know like the support for the family members is such an important part of this. And the fact that I've been able to work alongside Natashah the entire way has just been an added bonus. So I'm happy to be here. I love getting to talk with families, kind of share some of my own experience, strength, and hope, as well as providing some of that education and support that I wish I would have had early on kind of in this journey for my own personal self.
Yay. Well, I'm just happy to have you here. And ladies and gentlemen, do not let her fool you. She is truly an expert, whether she wants to own that or not. So let's get into this, right? So let's talk a little bit about, if we can start to break down just a basic definition and understanding the difference between doing, enabling, helping, and supporting. Let's start with when we're looking at families when their loved ones come into the treatment space. Let's talk a little bit about, what the doing looks like and what the enabling looks like, and talk a little bit about how conducive, how beneficial is that to their loved ones and or to them during the treatment process.
Well, I mean, the doing and enabling is common, right? That's what I deal with just about everyone that comes into the facility. And And I say things and I don't mean any offense by it if anyone is listening to this and can relate to it. I say it to kind of hopefully bring some, I guess, awareness to kind of what you're doing. But, doing and enabling, kind of breaking it down to its simplest form, right? Is if you have a loved one that you see struggling and you're like, and you know that they have legs that work, right? They have legs that work. They know how to walk. They can walk. But instead of letting them walk, you're walking for them. I mean, that's like the epitome of what it is, right? It's,
Mhm.
hey, I see that you have legs. I see that your legs work. I see that you're capable of walking. But instead of letting you do it, how about I jump in and walk for you? And so it's like, they're in treatment, they're getting help. There's professionals in treatment for a reason that are giving them all this information as well as giving the families all the information. But instead of allowing that to happen, it's like, well, let me do this for you. Let
Why
me do treatment for you.
why do you think families find themselves in that space? Do you think that that's in like intentional? Do they even realize that that's what they're doing? Why do you think that they do that?
I don't think they realize that they're doing it. There's something that I've kind of talked with clients recently about the fact that, I've had some clients who have said, well, this doesn't really affect my family as much. And I kind of look at them a little dumbfounded because I'm like, well, it does. And they're like, well, if I change, they're fine. They don't need to work on anything else. And I'm like, well, you're wrong because they do. Because what happens is when someone in your life struggles with addiction, you adapt to them, right? So maybe before addiction with substances was present, you maybe had a little bit of a healthier relationship. If you dig a little bit deeper into that, I'm sure it really wasn't that healthy, but that's for another topic. Um, but when you throw the substance in there, you essentially adapt, right? So you have someone who struggles with addiction, and guess what? They're manipulating you, right? And throughout time, as they manipulate you, it becomes your norm to start adapting to reacting to them in certain ways, such as doing things for them, right? Yeah, when they're using substances, they're going to manipulate the people around them to do things for them because they would rather spend their time, energy, and money on getting that substance because that's what their brain is wired to do, right? So the people around them adapt to doing that. And so when they're no longer having to do that because the professionals are trying to help and the loved one is trying to do it for themselves, the family member is almost lost, right? It's kind of like, this is my purpose in life. Whether you want it to be your purpose or not, that's what you've adapted it to becoming. And now you're being told that you have to find a whole new purpose, right? It's, hey, my son struggles with addiction. They're in treatment. My entire purpose in life is how do I get them sober? They're in a place to get sober. So now what's your purpose? So I don't think that they really recognize that they're doing it. I don't think that they really want to do it that way, but it's essentially the only thing they know how to do. It's comfortable.
Well, you brought something. So first of all, a lot of great information, but you dropped a really important word that I hear a lot of families say, and the word is manipulation. I'm so easily manipulated. And I always have this question, so hopefully you can answer this for me, is did that manipulation start when we recognized that the addiction was in the chronic stage? Did they just become manipulative when they started using, or is that manipulative behavior, had it existed before, but maybe we just wasn't aware or paying attention or noticed that it existed?
Oh, it's absolutely a learned behavior. That's something that kind of goes into like what I, had alluded to earlier, that, some of the unhealthy tendencies were likely there before the substance were present. It was just kind of more recognizable when the substance comes into play. But one of the things that I talk a lot with my families about is they get so angry at their loved ones for manipulating them. But what they fail to realize is that they also manipulate their loved ones. So it's not a one person party here, right? It takes,
Right.
two people in a relationship, whether it's your spouse, your son, your parent, your sibling, whatever the relationship is, right? There's two people That's what defines it as a relationship. If one person is manipulating the other person is also manipulating the other, right? But you're
are
also
you
allowing it.
and I know I'm going to put you on the spot here. Can you give an example in some of the experiences you have? Because I'm sure some of our listeners are going, I don't manipulate, right? Especially as the family members. Can you share an experience of a time or an example where we're manipulating from the family's perspective?
I can give a few examples here. So the biggest one that I often see is, you know, and I'm going to use an example. So the phone call day for us is on Sunday in the treatment center that I work in. If for whatever reason the loved one doesn't call on Sunday, or, you know, whatever happens, they may not call. The next time they talk to the family member, well, I waited all day long for you to call me on Sunday and you never called me. And I can't believe that you wouldn't use your phone call to call me. Why would you call someone else? Guess what you're doing in that moment? And guess who's probably going to get a phone call that next Sunday, because you just manipulated them into giving you a phone call on Sunday, right? Which then breeds us into, you know, you have that codependency aspect of it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's where the manipulation stems from, is, hey, I'm codependent on you, right? I know that if I make you feel a certain way, you're going to do something that's going to make me feel better. And so anytime you say anything to the effect of rising a feeling out of the other person, you're manipulating, right? So making them feel bad for not calling you every day, making them feel bad for taking time away to be in treatment, making them feel bad for not being present for so-and-so's birthday because they were in treatment. I mean, kind of beating around the bush in a sense, right? Of saying what you really want to say to make them feel a certain way and then change their behavior based off of it.
That is such a great explanation. And, you know, I'm sitting here just smiling from ear to ear, because in my years of working with families, it's a hot topic. And I have a lot of families that don't even realize, just in that bit of dialogue, it sounds so effortless, right? You're having this conversation with your loved one. It's like, I can't believe it starts off with, I can't believe this. So how come you did? And you sort of put it back on them, right? But the reality is we are doing it so much more. It's so much more common in our conversations, right? It's become common practice for us. So we are not aware that we're also manipulating in those conversations. And I like when you said, you know, that manipulation is a two-way street, and it's an exchange of trying to, I hate to use the word make, only because, you know, we can't make someone feel a certain way, but we're doing whatever we can to impede on their space and project that feeling onto them, like you said, to now change that behavior. And all I keep hearing as you were talking was control, 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 right? Someone is trying to control that conversation or trying to control that relationship. So I appreciate that, that breakdown of it. Tell me a little bit more. Let's move a little bit into the, a lot of families say, okay, I hear you, Alaina, you know, I've been enabling them and I'm an enabler and I want to stop, right? I want to support them. Is it just that easy, especially when we're talking about behaviors, and behaviors are learned? These are things that we learn in early childhood and in development. Is it just that easy to say, okay, I want to stop enabling and I want to set boundaries and I want to be supportive? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, majority of the families that I talk to, you know, they'll tell me in the very first phone call, I know I'm enabling, right? I know that I do it. I don't want to do it, but I know that I do it. And, you know, it goes much further than saying like, I don't want to enable, because let's break it down. Why do you enable, right? What is it that's driving that enabling behavior? Because you're not going to do something if you know it's causing harm. Right? Like if your brain is telling you, hey, this is not okay, this is causing harm. Obviously, if you love and care about your loved one, which if you're talking to me, you do, right? You're not going to keep doing those things if it's that easy, right? And so you have to break it down of, you know, why do you enable, right? And the common answer to that would be fear. You know, there's a lot of other things that go into that, but fear is the common one, right? If you keep asking questions and you keep breaking it down over and over and over again, it's, you know, well, I pay their car insurance because I'm fearful that they're going to go to jail, right? Or I pay for them to get food because I'm fearful that they're going to go hungry. Or I pay for them to have an apartment because I'm fearful that they're going to end up on the streets, right? And the more you break it down, the biggest fear of all is I'm fearful that they are going to die. And that's what happens, right? So instead of, putting up appropriate boundaries, you're going to run yourself round and round and round and round in circles based off of a fear of something happening to the person that you love. In the grand scheme of things, you have zero control over that. But the enabling, you have to start with, okay, if you can recognize, Lainey and Natashah are really speaking to me. I'm an enabler, I'm manipulative, I'm codependent, right? And you're kind of going along with all these things that we're saying. The next step into figuring out what you can do to change those behaviors is what is driving that behavior. You have to start there. You can't just sit here and say, well, Lainey said that I should set a boundary and blah, 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 right? Whatever boundary I say you should set, which I would never say that. But if that's what you're going with, right, go ahead and try to set that boundary, right? Let's give a good boundary here. If you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I enable, I'm codependent, I'm manipulative. A boundary I want you to set is telling your loved one that you are no longer going to provide them with financial support, right? Go ahead and try it. And then after you do it, let me know how it goes for you, right? Because if you do that and you're successful with it, I'm going to be impressed, right? Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is you're going to set that boundary and you may be able to stick to it for a while. But if you didn't do the work prior of actually identifying why we're enabling and figuring out what those feelings are, what those limiting beliefs are, what those core beliefs are, if you don't figure out what all of that is first, you're going to break.
Well, and I think that 100%, and I think that's where now we create this space, which a lot of people fail to realize when they say someone's manipulating me, we're creating a space to be manipulated. Because now using that example, I have a loved one that says, okay, I'm no longer going to pay, support you financially. And they're like, okay. And you're like, okay. And like you said, it may go along for a little while, but then one day you get a phone call and they're like, oh my God, I lost my job and I've got my car payment and I've got my car insurance. And in order to get to a new job, I'm going to need my car. And they paint this sort of quote unquote beautiful story. And I say quote unquote because the way they present it to you, it is so believable and you buy into it and you're like, well, yeah, okay, they lost their job and they're going to need to get to another one. And how are they going to get to the other job or get to the interview? And so now we've fallen into the trap, right? And now
those feelings are coming back up, right? You're getting those feelings again of, oh my gosh, they lost their job. I'm fearful that if they don't get another job, then they may relapse, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm fearful if they don't get another job, they're going to relapse and then they may go to jail and your fear starts spiraling again.
Well, when we talk about those layers of emotions, I talk to my families all the time. Underneath all of that fear and sadness and being scared, some having guilt and shame, ideally at the core of that is powerlessness, right? We are experiencing powerlessness, but we don't ever allow ourselves to dig that deep emotionally, so we don't even get that far. Like you said, that instinctual feeling of fear and our brain goes into that sort of survival mode of the fight, flight, and freeze. And now we're like, okay, we have to do something about it. And a lot of times I have to slow my families down and say, well, first of all, why did they lose their job? Let's start there, right? Let's not run this tape through and look at immediately working on getting another job. Can we understand why they lost their job in the first place? Now, another part of that manipulation is your loved one would maybe really good at being able to say to you, well, it's because of the job, because it's somebody else, right? We're going to put that responsibility on someone else as to why we don't have that job. And I believe if we don't ask questions, if we don't understand really what's going on with it and understanding that our loved ones have a part to play with whatever is going on in their lives, right? If you get the job, you had a part to play in getting the job. If you lost the job, there's a high likelihood that you had a part to play in losing the job, right?
Oh, but my baby did not do anything to lose that job. Right? That's where that goes.
And
right?
listen, For those that are hearing us out there today and you want to, why do they think this is funny? We only laugh because we hear it so much. We hear so often. In the last 7 or 8 years that I've been working with families, I hear a lot, my baby wouldn't do that. You know, my poor baby, my baby this, my baby that. Or even with couples, you know, the wives or the husbands be like, well, I know my wife better than that, or I know my husband better than that. And I'm like, well, do you really know them? Because if you don't really understand the disease of addiction, do you really understand the mindset? Do you really understand what's going on internally for them? And do you really understand why they're behaving the way that they're behaving? Right? So let's talk a little bit about, because God knows we can talk about this all day. And I really appreciate you taking the time out this morning to have this conversation. So we have now families that are in the space of doing and enabling and knowing that they need to stop. And we're understanding that you can't just stop enabling just because intellectually you have every intention and want to. There's a lot of emotional stuff within ourselves we have to be aware of, identify, and work on, right? So now we're moving into this place of being supportive. And I'd like for you to take a minute to share with our audience truly what that supportive means and what does that look like in the life of someone that's in treatment and moving into the process of recovery. How does the family member get from that place of, okay, I don't want to enable anymore. I don't want to be the one that's doing it anymore. How do they transition to into that space of being helping when asked and being supportive to their loved ones?
Well, I think it all starts with, first, you need to be ready to accept that you need some sort of help. It's not easy when your loved one is the one that's going into treatment to get help. And then you get, if your loved one's at the Robert Alexander Center, right, you'd get the phone call from me and I'm saying, hey, right, like you need some help too. You need to be willing to accept that help. You need to be willing to reach out to your own resources, right? Like there are resources that you can be a part of starting today. Let's say your loved one isn't even ready to go to treatment yet, but you're listening to us and you're saying, hey, I'm ready to get some help, right? You want to change the game a little bit. You want to do something differently. So start reaching out to what those resources may be, right? You need to do individual therapy. You need to find a 12-step program to be a part of. There are 12-step programs out there for family members who have, loved ones who struggle with addiction. You need to get into some sort of family help group, right? There is family groups out there that are available, either community led or with an individual person such as Natashah, right? There are options out there for you to go ahead and start that journey. But the biggest thing is being willing to accept that. If you are saying, okay, I don't want to enable, I want to change, I want to learn how to be helping and supportive, but every time someone gives you a piece of advice that you've asked for, right, or gives you some tools to use and you're like, I don't want that. Well,
let me if I can interject really quickly, because here's what comes to mind. What's wrong with me, Alaina? Why me? Why do I have to get help? My loved one's the one that does drugs and alcohol. I don't drink, I don't do drugs. So why am I the one needing to find some sort of a 12-step based program, or why do I have to seek therapy? I just don't understand why. What do I have to do with this?
Wow, I've said those words. And I almost want to bring it back to Michelle's video where you had her on, I think it was last week. And she said, she was like, understanding that this goes much further than the substance. This isn't just, oh, your loved one struggles with using a substance and access, right? I can guarantee any person who's listening to this, they're listening to it, one, because they're a family member, right? They have someone that they love who struggles with addiction. I can guarantee that, I think Michelle, I don't remember if she said it in the video or not, but impulse buying, right? Do you impulse buy whenever you don't feel well? Do you wake up every single morning and the first thing on your mind is your loved one, right? Is your life revolved around your loved one? Is your life revolved around gambling, around food, around work, around sex, around anything, right? Anything that's done in excess, I promise you, you can benefit from these same services, right? So my biggest thing was impulse buying. Absolutely, right? Then it turned into food. I was just telling a story the other day that, when I was younger and my mom was in active addiction, food was my coping mechanism. And I remember distinctly that I would wait until, I lived with my grandparents, and I would wait until my grandparents would fall asleep. And God forbid if they see this, they're gonna hate that I said this, but I always knew when they were asleep because you could hear them snoring. And so my room was in the basement. And so the moment I heard them snoring, I would walk up the steps, and as much food as I could fit into my arms, I would get all of that food, take it down to the basement, and just binge eat all of it because it made me feel good. Right. And over the years, that was what I used to cope. And so I remember the first time someone said, hey, your mom's in treatment, getting better, you need help. I was like, no, I don't. Right. She needs help. But then as time went on, I was like, okay, she's sober and doing well, and I still feel awful. Why do I still feel so bad when I thought that my problem was her, right? I thought my problem was, well, if she gets sober, I'll be fine. But here she was sober, and I still felt terrible about myself. I felt terrible about myself. I was angry. I was not satisfied. I was not happy. I mean, all of these things. And I started questioning, like, okay, if she's sober and I'm still not feeling good with myself, maybe I should have listened to that person who told me I needed help, and I pretty much told them to like leave me alone, right? And some not so nice words. And so then I did reach out. I asked my grandma. I was still, I was under the age of 18 at this time. But I asked her, I was like, okay, I need help. I don't know what kind of help I need, but I know I need help. Um, and before I ever got to that help, I had my first panic attack, right? I remember sitting on my grandma's bed, and she was like, "Do I need to take you to the hospital?" I mean, it was that severe. And I was like, this is exactly what that person was talking about, is that my problems don't really come from addiction, so to speak, but what they have come from is a dysfunctional family dynamic. Like I said earlier, you adapt to the person, you adapt to people in your life, right? And whenever
Yeah,
substances are
you're
part of
almost made to adapt to the environment and what's going on in the environment, because you're
yeah.
you're living in it day in and day out. How can you not? It's almost like a vacuum. How could you not get sucked into any and all of what's going on in that environment?
Well, it's survival, right? It's how do I survive in this moment, right? And when I started recognizing, okay, I need some help, I went from, I mean, because when my mom was sober, I couldn't try to control her anymore, right? There was no more manipulating her, making her feel bad. I still gave my jabs in there when I could, because let's be honest, I was sick, right? She was doing well, and I was over here like, you were terrible, and saying things that, what's the point in saying it?
Well, that's, if I can interject it, that's something I want to touch on with what you said just now. You've got this loved one that is coming out of the treatment process and doing well and doing everything that has been asked of them, and they're getting better. And these families are sick. And it's a great question, like, well, why am I still angry? Why am I still resentful? Why am I now struggling with depression? Why is it that I now have post-traumatic stress? Why is it that I can't seem to get my anxiety down? Is it fair to say that, like what you just said, we're now a product of the environment. We've now, been caught up in part of the active addiction. Now your loved one is out of it, but because you're not doing what you need to do mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, right? Now you're the one that remains emotionally sick. Can you speak a little bit to when the clients that you're working with come out of treatment and are going into aftercare? Can you help our families understand? Because most oftentimes my recommendation in the past has always been, when they are stepping down to whether it be IOP, outpatient, we always recommend sober living. Can you, based on what you just talked about, help our audience understand why we don't recommend their loved ones returning home sooner than later?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, when my mom was sober, I would do And it sounds, I sometimes I hate saying it because it makes me sound like a terrible person. And if you think that way about me, I'm sorry. I promise I'm not. But
You're not.
I would do or say anything I could to make them feel bad for what they put me through. Right. So she's sober, she's doing better. Instead of going to sober living, she comes and lives with, my grandma, which is where I'm at, right? Wh- While she's there, I would say things, like, she would say, I don't know, well, can I go to your graduation, right? Well, you weren't at any of the other graduations, so what would make this one any different? Right? Why am I saying those things? Right? At the moment, I was saying those things because I was still hurt, right? And hurt people,
Mhm.
right? And so I'm expressing that hurt to her, and she's over here looking at me like, thank God my mom had some reasonable saying to say back to it. But, to this day, my mom will look at me and say, I understand that I hurt you for the actions that I had in the past, and I'm hoping to no longer be that person.
So, and I want to chime in here. So for our audience, that response that her mother had given her is a beautiful example of when we are doing our own, as addicts, when we are doing our own therapy and we're working our own program of recovery and we're working on ourselves, we learn on how to take ownership and accountability for the way we were in active addiction and the way that we have harmed others in our lives. So I I'm almost certain that the way your mother responded, that helps diffuse any and all possibility of conflict, growing in your interaction with each other, right? Can we sort of paint that picture a little bit differently? And if your mother hadn't done that work, let's say your mom wasn't working a program and she hasn't been doing, willing to take accountability and ownership, can we sort of look at that from the perspective of a family member being hurt and saying something, not realizing how their hurt is now hurting the other person and how that can impact the other person in their early stages of recovery?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if my mom hadn't been at that point, and I'm sure there were other times that she wasn't at that point and I said some things, when you haven't worked a program long enough or you haven't built a solid enough foundation in your recovery, what happens is you are still figuring out how to handle your emotions, right? So not only are you trying to handle your emotions, but of course, family members, and I hear this all day long, well, I need them to know how they made me feel, right? I need them to understand how they made me feel. And to an extent, I agree with that, right? But if you're every day throwing it in their face about, well, you need to feel guilty about this, you need to be angry about this, and this is how you made me feel, what you're doing is they already know they made you feel that way, right? And they already carry enough guilt, shame, remorse, and everything else, right? So they have this heavy weight already on their shoulders, and they're going through life saying, okay, I know that if I use, I don't have to feel any of this, right? It'll just make it all go away. But because I don't want to go back to that dark hole, I'm going to keep using the tools that I have to get me through with my own weight, right? And then here comes the family, here's double the weight, right? Now you're already struggling through with your weight on how to cope and stay sober, but let's throw in a double weight here, right? And it's almost like, I do a lot of references because it's easier for me to understand. We'll go back to the walking reference, right? I know that you have two legs that work and you know how to walk, but I'm going to walk for you. But now I'm definitely not going to walk for you because you made me mad, right? So you got to walk by yourself. So you haven't walked for 10 years on your own. I've done it for you. So your legs are pretty weak, right? And they're starting to build back some muscle to learn how to walk again. And they're learning how to walk again with your body weight, right? But now let's add on your family's body weight to those legs too, that don't have the muscles to even carry your own body weight yet. What do you think is going to happen to those legs? Right? They're going to break under pressure. And so that's what can happen. And so, families often, they get mad whenever we say, yeah, our recommendation is not for them to come home. Well, our recommendation is for them to not come home, because what's going to end up happening is they're going to break under pressure. They don't have the proper tools. They don't have the proper muscles, so to speak, to carry all of that right now. And they've got to build some more strength, because you can't dump, right? If you dump, you're just going to add more of that pressure and that weight.
Well, I have to say, you just said that, and I'm holding back tears because to me, that is such a great analogy in describing how I always say to my families, just because your loved one went to treatment for 30 days, 45 days, it's just the beginning. And I truly love the analogy of working on, we have to daily, continuously work on strengthening those muscles, right? And a lot of times families want their loved ones to come out and return to work and return to doing this and doing that. And I'm not saying by any means that your loved ones do not need to be responsible. But again, if someone has been taking the pressure off of me for such a long time, and now all of a sudden it's handed back to me and I'm not strong enough to take it all at once, rather than maybe passing it off one at a time. I know from my own experience in active addiction, it's a lot of psychological and emotional pressures of my family that added, right? I'm not saying that they're the reason why I use, that was an added pressure along with my own psychological and emotional pressures that I had, that made it very difficult for me to get sober in the earlier years of my life. So I'm really grateful for you using that analogy. Can we talk a little bit about, a lot of times working with clients, we will say that, and I have found for myself, so I'm speaking from personal experience where I used my addiction as a crutch, right? Do you find that to be the same? Do you find that to be true for families as well, where they use their loved one's addiction as a crutch? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things, and I've kind of been talking about this a little bit more recently too, and with Natashah as well, is oftentimes you'll hear, when I ask people to stop enabling, right? Or not necessarily ask them to stop enabling, but we start kind of exploring what enabling looks like and how they're enabling. And we'll go with 26 years old, right? I got a client who's 26 years old. I'm working with a parent, or maybe even a spouse, right? And what I will hear is, well, I can't tell them that they can't come home unless they can complete treatment, because what are they going to do? Live on the street, right? They can't stay in treatment that long because they have bills to pay and they need to pay X, Y, and Z. Or I let them not work and I pay all the bills, because if I ask them to go to work, they're going to be job from job and job and job and job, right? So there's all these excuses as to why they either can't continue treatment or go into treatment, or why the family has so much weight and they can't take any time for themselves because they got to take care of X, Y, and Z. And commonly what I ask my family is, if you take substances out of the picture entirely, right? So let's think about 26-year-old living in the house of parents, okay? Not working, not paying bills, doesn't pay for their own car, parents pay for their car, right? Take substances out of that and also reflect on your own self. At the age of 26, what were you capable of doing? Right? Like, I think about that and it's like, and parents will tell me like, oh, I was working and I was working multiple jobs to take care of my kids. And I had to make sure I had to sacrifice this so I could pay for that. And it's like, interesting, right? Like, you can do that, but the thought of making your loved one do that, it's like, oh my gosh, we can't do that, right? And so then whenever I kind of dig a little bit deeper in my, with that in my families, and they say, well, they can't do it because they use drugs, or they can't do it because they drink, or whatever the substance is. And it's like, well, if I had a place to sleep, didn't have to pay any bills, didn't have to work, and I got away with just drinking and doing whatever I wanted to do with zero consequence, like, yeah, I'm probably not going to bust my butt, because guess what? There's no consequence, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I want to add here, and I think of James Sweezy in one of his stories that he shared, and we go back to the enabling. A perfect example is when you talked about ordering food when they're in sober living, right? If they're in sober living and you're paying their rent, right? Because maybe they are working, but they're not making enough. And every time they call you for a pizza, right, or something to eat, and you order them a pizza or something to eat, okay, so now they're in sober living. They get to do, and depending upon the sober living and the house rules that they may or may not have, you're paying their rent, you're paying their food, Now the money, whatever little money that they're making, what is that going to? Right? Does that now increase the risk for them to use that money not wisely and frivolously?
Well, what
Right?
is that teaching them? Right? I mean, take it back to when your loved one first moved out on their own, or you first moved out on your own. There's some struggle that has to be done for you to learn what you need to do, right? And then I turn around and I ask the question of right now, today, right? Anyone who's listening to this, Natashah, think about it in your head, right? I think about it in my head. If I were to lose my job and fall flat on my face, who is going to be there to pick you up? Or do you have to fight your way out of that? Right?
Well, I know for me, I'm going to have to fight my way out of that.
Absolutely. Now, do I have some supportive people in my life who would help me? Absolutely. They will support me. They will give me the resources that I need, right? I know my grandma would say, hey, you just lost your job. Have you thought about applying here, here, and here, right? If I go to my grandma and I say, hey, do you know of any places hiring? She's going to say, yep, here's some places hiring. But what she's not going to do is say, let me pay all your bills for you.
Or how about, why don't you come and stay with me for a while? Give up the apartment. You can't afford it, and come stay with me. Right. So
well,
this
I
is
don't know.
great.
My grandma might say that, but right. But what you have to learn here is that me as a person, even if my grandma did say that, I'm not going to do that. What I want to teach myself as well as other people is that you have to learn how to take responsibility. And if you continuously let other people take responsibility, or you take other people's responsibility, you are the one that's keeping them from doing that.
So this is a great segue and a great way to, as we wrap up our show, to talk about that supportive piece. So this is a great example of being able to really outline for our families what support looks like in a situation like that. So I love the example of, I've lost my job, I don't have any money coming in, and whether I'm complaining about it or just telling someone about it, what does that support now look like on the other side?
I'm going to go with another analogy here, because I don't want to give a straight answer, because I don't like putting words in other people's mouths. There's two sides to a street, right? So you have one side of the street over here. You have the other side of the street over here. This side is my side. This side is your side, Natashah, okay? If you are struggling over here on this side, I need to understand that my only responsibility is right here on my side of the street. However, when you look at the middle of the street, there are lines, right? You have the solid lines and then you have the dotted lines, okay? Natashah's over here struggling. My responsibility is right here, not right here, okay? Natashah says, Lainey, I'm really struggling. I've lost my job. Do you have any advice for me? There's the key kicker, right? Do you have any advice for me? She just asked me. So what she did is she took that solid line and turned it into a dotted line, right? What happens with a dotted line whenever you're driving? You can pass over, right? Now I'm going to pass over because she just asked me for help.
So gave permission.
She gave me permission. I'm going to give her some help. I'm going to say, hey, I know you asked me for some advice. My advice would be to get your resume back out, update your resume. There are some sites that you can go on, start filling out applications. Like, here's all the resources you need for what you just gave me permission to give you. And then guess what happens after you cross over on a dotted line? What do you have to do on the street?
Go back to stay in your lane,
side, right? You got to go back to your side and stay in your lane. And at that point, that's up to Natashah now. That's on her side of the street, right? She asked me for advice. She gave me permission. I came over. I gave her resources. I did not do anything for her. I did not put in any extra effort. The only thing I did is gave her resources, and then I went back to my side. It is now.
You mean you didn't go to your neighbor or to your friend to get me a job, or you didn't fill out my resume for me, or, you're not going to give me some money in the interim while I go through this process? You're not going to do that for me?
No, ma'am. No, absolutely not.
Does that mean you don't love me because you're not doing that stuff for me?
It means I love you enough that I know you can do it. But that's common, right? What you just asked is what a lot of people do ask themselves, right? But I know that you can be independent, right? I know you can do all the things, but I also know that if I do it for you, you're never going to learn how to do it.
Doesn't and right in that moment, isn't that where we now as family members, when we talk about you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, you can't change it, but we do have to look at how we contribute to it. Is this a great place for us to look at on how we are contributing to the dependency issue, right? Because the minute you give me that permission and I step into a place, or you in this particular scenario, you're now helping me and doing for me, I know I now become more dependent than when I'm struggling. I can give Alaina permission to come into my space and then just let her have her way in my space.
Well, let's go back to the analogy, right? You gave me permission, you gave me the dotted line. I go over that dotted line. We know from driving a car that after you pass on a dotted line, you have to get back over in your lane, right? What happens if you stay on that side, right? Now I've gone from here's all the resources to let me do your resume for you. Let me go talk to the neighbors and see if I can get you a job. Let me call some places for you. So I'm now putting myself on her side of the lane. I can't get back over because I'm now stuck on her lane. If we're driving on the wrong side of the road, what happens? Right? We're either dodging cars or we're going to hit head on. Right? But then let's also think about this too. I don't know about anybody else, but if you ever do actually pass a car and you go on the other lane and you come back over, there's this almost fear of anxiety of, oh, if there's a cop up here, I could get pulled over, right? When you go back over, there's going to be some feelings come back up in you because you're not used to it. This is new. This is fearful. This is anxiety ridden. There's a lot of things, right? I'm fearful that she's not going to do the things she needs to do, right? I'm fearful of letting go of that control to her. You're going to feel some of that while you're over here, but you got to stay on this side because if you come back over, you're going to have a head-on collision.
And that's where that self-work comes in, right? It's so you went into her lane, or into my lane in this particular analogy, and you gave me some resources, you offered support. Now you go back into your lane and you're feeling fearful and anxiety. And what we want to encourage our families is to not sit in the emotion. It's important to process that emotion. So phone a friend, right? If you have an accountability partner, if there's a meeting that you can get to, if you can journal, if you're a person that prays and believes or have a relationship with a higher power, there's so many different ways and avenues and resources for yourself that we strongly encourage you to tap into, so you're not consistently now driving with that fear and anxiety and or that worry within you. Because the next time they call you, now what I want to add to this is when you talked about the analogy of it being a solid line, when the individual in your life asks you for help, it creates a space and gives permission for that solid line to become broken lines. But what about the times when your loved one is struggling and they don't ask for help and the line remains solid? Do you ever see families crossing over that line because they see them struggling, but their loved one hasn't given them permission or haven't even asked for help? Have you ever seen that? And what does that look like?
Every time. Every time. Of course, I mean, it's like, my loved one's struggling. I see them struggling. Let me jump in and help because I don't want them to, suffer the consequences, or I don't want them to have that worry. The biggest thing I get is, well, I've been told that their stress should be reduced when they're in early recovery. So if I do it for them, it'll help them be sober. Wrong, right? Because they have to learn how to handle that stress. And so, I see it happen all the time, but you have to remember, okay, it's a double line here, right? They're struggling on this side. You cross that double line. Now you have the fear and anxiety of, oh my gosh, I just crossed, illegally. The cops may come and get me now, right? We're still in the reference to the cars here. So that's where we're at now. But not only that, we're also in a higher risk of a head-on collision, because typically whenever you have the solid line on, that's because there's a higher risk for a head-on collision. And now you're also stuck over there because you've now enmeshed yourself to do all the things for them. So you have just increased your risk and their risk substantially rather than just staying on your side of the street. I mean, every time, right?
My mind's just blown. I love the analogy, and I'm certain that analogy is going to stick for so many people. It's just mind blowing that, and I don't know if this happened earlier in life where we just get lost between enabling and help, supporting them. I try to remind my families that to help someone means we're going to assist them, right? Helping is not doing. So if I'm going to help you, I'm going to assist you. But my assisting you doesn't come from me recognizing you needing assistance. My assistance comes from you asking me for that assistance, right? So for instance, I think of, you talk about analogies, and what comes to mind is someone on a ladder. And I'm watching them needing assistance. I'm not just going to run up the ladder to assist them, because the ladder 9 out of 10 times not going to be able to handle both of us on the ladder. I need to wait and observe and wait for the individual on the ladder to say, hey, can you assist me? Now, even when they ask me, can you assist me, they need to share with me how they want me to assist. Right? Don't you think that's important? Because I think a lot of times someone says, yes, I need help. Now we're not even asking, well, how do you want my help? We just jump right in. We cross all those lanes. We cross all those solid lines. We're coming into incoming traffic, because we just want to help. And understanding, ladies and gentlemen, that a lot of, Alaina said it earlier, it's a lot of what we're doing, whether it's enabling, whether it's fixing, whether it's rescuing someone from their emotions, trying to control situations that we are powerless over, it all stems back into us doing some self-reflection of what's driving that. What do I believe to be true? What am I feeling that are driving these behaviors that I've just mentioned, right? So it's super important for each and every one of you out there that are struggling with a loved one. And let me say this before we wrap this up today. I often hear people say, well, it's different to set boundaries with an adult child, and it's different because it's my husband. It doesn't matter. It is a human being that you love. And at the end of the day, like I have said in a previous episode, setting boundaries are not for the other individual. Setting that boundary is for you. It's for you to let others know what your limits are. There are things in life that we are willing to tolerate, and there are things in life that we're not willing to tolerate. And it blows my mind, and it's amazing to me sometimes when we have a loved one, the things that we will tolerate, because if we had a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, or someone else trying to, I hate to use the word, maybe force their way into our lives, we wouldn't remotely tolerate what we tolerate with our loved ones. So love has nothing to do with this. I always say it's better to love someone to life than loving someone to death, right? So as we close up today, Alaina, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Is there a message that you may have for any of your families and or mine that are listening today that, any words of wisdom you want to leave them with?
So I was thinking about this as you were talking, and, of course, if you're sitting there right now with the question of, I hear everything you're saying, what do I do now? The best thing you can do now is reach out, build your support group, reach out for individual work, start working on yourself. That's the first step. So when you end this podcast, when you're done listening to us, the first thing I need you to do is start Googling therapist, life coach, 12-step support groups for family members. Do something for yourself and start the journey for you, whether your loved one's ready or not. Go ahead and take that first step. That's all you have to do.
Amen. And if you do have a loved one that is in need of help, in need of treatment, please, I don't know how to say this without boasting about it, but the Robert Alexander Center is the bomb. Robert Alexander Center Treatment Center in Mount Washington, Kentucky. For those of you who know me, I've been in this field for 25 years now, and this is truly not just a top-notch center. It's clinical team, it's medical team, it's alumni team. It's an amazing family of individuals that have come together to work collectively to ensure that your loved ones are getting the utmost care. For any one of you that may have heard Michelle's story in my previous episode, her loved one came through the Robert Alexander Center. She is a mother that was impacted by addiction that also went through and learned a lot through the family program and its services. It's a one-stop shop for everyone, for the client, your loved one, and for your family to truly get their healing that they need so that we can begin to restore the relationships that have been damaged by the disease of addiction. So, at the end of this, Alaina will be able to we will put up some contact information for her. So if you do have a loved one that is seeking treatment, they don't have to be in the Mount Washington area. If they're here in Florida, if they're out in North Carolina, Philly, on the East Coast, wherever they may be, and you know that they're looking for a great place where they can get loved on, that they can learn on how to be self-sufficient, and also be able to have a place where families can be heard, where families get an opportunity to heal, and the families get to learn how to take care of themselves, how to love themselves again, how to breathe again. Then the Robert Alexander Center is definitely the place for both the client and the family. So Miss Alaina, thank you so much for taking time today to come on and talk to my peeps and share all this great information. Do you have an email or a contact that we can maybe put out there right now in case that anybody wants to talk with you, or any of your families may have continued questions or concerns, maybe they can reach out to you?
So I do want to say that if you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, you can contact the Robert Alexander Center for Recovery at 502-317-2127. And then also, if you are a family member looking for just resources for yourself, you are welcome to email me at aphelps, so that's APHELPS, at racrecovery.com.
All right. Thanks again, Alaina. And thank you, everyone. See you next time. Hi, my name is Natashah Khan. I am a personal development coach. I am a published author, motivational speaker, and I'm here with an opportunity for you today. Do you ever sometimes feel sort of stuck, not really sure where you're heading in life, or looking back on your life and thinking, I didn't quite always accomplish the things that I wanted? Do you struggle with fear and/or anxiety, or you worry all the time? Or maybe you find yourself constantly giving to everyone else, but never really taking time to give to yourself. Or maybe you identify as a codependent and you realize that it's time for you to stop giving so much of yourself to everyone else and to stop and take time to give back to you. Well, you've come to the right place. On Monday evenings from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, I host a group that is a private group, so it's invitation only, to members who come together to begin to support each other, lift each other up, inspire each other, and learn the tools necessary on how to find their freedom, how to empower their voices, speak their truth, and discover their authentic selves. So if this sounds like something that you are interested in, you are welcome to reach out to me via email at empoweredvoices45@gmail.com. Again, that is empoweredvoices45@gmail.com. If you are looking to change your life, you are looking to transform and live the life that you've been destined to live, please don't hesitate to reach out today.